The good member from the 35th, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising in support of the amendment. You know, I feel like a deep sense of just dread every time this subject comes up. I've been working on it ever since I got to the legislature in 2023. I started working on it in 2023. I started working on it in 2024. I worked on it in 2025. And here I am working on it in 2026. These kids, Madam Speaker, don't have any more time left to give. As we speak right now, there is one or more precious children in our state living in a flop house, in a tent. Hard drug abuse, sexual violence, malnutrition. I passed my first bill on this House floor about Carry-On Franks, who was seen multiple times by CPS and Department of Children, Youth, and Families, even though he was extremely malnutritioned and beaten by his parents until he died. And Madam Speaker, I don't have to ask permission to read. I've been living in these fatality reports until I want to throw up every night. Baby Otis, Raleigh and Kennewick, Oakley Carlson, the baby in Whatcom County. Sometimes these babies don't even have names. And when you look at the fatality report, Madam Speaker, it's just a black line, another government statistic. They had a whole life ahead of them. They didn't often start off life very well. Born addicted to drugs. And it's not just fentanyl, it's meth laced with fentanyl. In my first session, DCYF gave 2 little boys back to a mother in Tacoma. A 6-year-old boy died and was found deceased next to his alive brother because the mother tased and beat that boy to his death while she was on meth. And I was told at the time by Department of Children, Youth, and Families, that's unfortunate, Representative. We should have just had more services. Are you kidding me? I've always maintained that I support family reunification when it is safe to do so. And I do support services when it is safe to do so and when those services are effective. But the data is clear. They are not effective. The Department of Children, Youth, and Families is not effective, despite the fact that many DCYF employees and frontline caseworkers and social workers say that the Keeping Families Together Act is the direct cause of critical incidents rising to record levels in our state. Judges in one of our counties, Kitsap County, Madam Speaker, call this Keeping Families Together Act the dead baby bill. And it's not just caseworkers and social workers and judges, it's first responders, cops, firefighters, foster families. How much more expert opinion do we need? And I've also heard that we need to tweak the language, and we need to consider that. Any language, Madam Speaker, would be better than what we have now. It would be a vast improvement to what we have now. And we don't want necessarily to toss a child into the system. When you can prevent tossing a child into the system, sometimes it's for the best. But the problem is that there is no chance for family reunification if the child is dead. You don't get a second chance. Ariel Garcia, Madam Speaker, visited multiple times by CPS because his mother was grabbing him by the neck and dragging him down the stairs. Service after service, CPS referral after CPS referral. You know what happened to him, Madam Speaker? He was stabbed 40 times by his meth-abusing mother, wrapped in a blanket and tossed onto the roadside like his life didn't even matter. Or how about baby BS in Spokane? November 8th, 2024, dies after dozens and dozens of CPS visits, SUD provider visits, because his parents were on fentanyl and amphetamines. And you know what happened to baby BS? His head was beaten in by a hammer. He died November 8th, 2024. The department found out 2 days later. These were lives taken by our laws, Madam Speaker, because the social workers are begging, please do something about this. I went to a WFSC conference where there was dozens and dozens and dozens of frontline social workers, and I had people left, right, and center crying on my shoulder. I stood there for 5 hours. Well, I had people who were not Republicans and not conservatives come up to me and cry on my shoulder because they know they have caseloads of 30, 40, 50. And they know when they go back to that home the next day, there's a high likelihood the child is going to be dead. But they have to follow this extreme long list of impossible tasks just to get into a dependency court, just to be told no, because the Keeping Families Together Act says no. You have to prove imminent physical harm, a measure of time. And that's why we need funding, at least for more caseworkers. They are drowning, and as a matter of fact, a bill passed earlier making it a felony to give out data in elections. We don't even make it a felony to assault a social worker in this state. And we ask them to go in some of the most dangerous places, expose themselves to fentanyl to save kids. That's wrong. That is so wrong. And we have a dwindling caseload because they're not even allowed to do their basic duty. They didn't sign up to be social workers to get rich, Madam Speaker. They signed up to a very difficult and hard job like our first responders do because they care about people. They care about families. And I do want them to reunify someday when safe. But you know what is not safe? Dumping services down a rope into a dark hole. That does not make a home safe from fentanyl. The fentanyl is not less deadly after the child's 5th birthday or 6th birthday or because you did some safe sleep training or any other kind of thing. If there's still fentanyl in the home, it is a danger. And it's against the law. And we want to say provide a lockbox in that parent's home so that after they've abused their fentanyl, hopefully, just maybe, they will remember to lock the fentanyl up in a lockbox after they're done crapping their pants and overdosing and urinating on themselves and puking on the floor, where they then drop their fentanyl or their deadly drugs for their babies and toddlers to get into. This subject makes me want to crawl out of my own skin, Madam Speaker, and we don't have any more time. I predicted every single session since I've been here how many more babies and toddlers would die or nearly die. And when we Narcan a toddler in our streets, like I had to watch multiple times just this last summer on King 5, we don't even consider that a near fatality. Are you kidding me? That's nuts. If it's anything our state government can do, Madam Speaker, it is to protect the most vulnerable people in our state. And I can't think of any more vulnerable population than the voiceless babies and toddlers born addicted to drugs because of the negligence and abuse and malnourishment and treatment of their parents. And substance use disorder is a disorder. We can cure it. We should help those parents and save their lives. But do you think that parent wants to stop doing fentanyl if one day they learn it's because of their dangerous addiction that they negligently killed their kids? That doesn't put a family back together. Urging a yes on this amendment, Madam Speaker. Do it for the kids.
Marks, Representative Couture.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is pretty simple. It creates a sales tax holiday for the periods between Black Friday all the way through Cyber Monday, that weekend that we have every year. And Mr. Speaker, I know you've probably been there like I have, younger dad, with a young family, maybe earlier in our careers, financially stressed during the holidays, trying to provide for our families and make sure that we give our kids and our family members a good Christmas season. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, NAMI is a mental health organization, and they report that 64%, 3 in 5 Americans feel a lot of stress and mental health issues during the holiday season. 3 in 5 Americans, it is a stressful time. I've been there myself, trying to make the decisions about how much of your money you can allocate towards buying those Christmas presents for your young kids or whatever it may be, or trading between filling up your gas tank maybe and buying groceries and those things, buying that tree that goes up in the living room for Christmas morning. Mr. Speaker, I dubbed this amendment personally myself, no tax on Christmas. That's what I'm calling this amendment. And despite the amount of Americans, and including people in our state, that feel this financial stress during the holiday season, almost every single time the number one factor is the financial stress that they feel during that holiday season. And as this budget assumes a reckless and unconstitutional income tax on high earners that will at some point be absolutely spread to the rest of us, I think it's important to find opportunities to lower regressive taxes in our state. And could you imagine what this could potentially do for our brick and mortar, small local businesses? What it could do for retail in our state, the economic activity that could be driven already on a high economic activity weekend every single year in this state. What kind of relief we can give to people for purchases under $500 as a result of this sales tax holiday. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, many other states, including states without income taxes, have sales tax holidays. Florida has many of them. And this is at least one way we could take the financial stress off of our constituents during what is already a very stressful time, and find a way to give them some level of affordability in this state when it comes to purchasing their goods and purchasing the things that they need. Mr. Speaker, I urge you to vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a little funny how we call tax relief a gimmick. And I just want to center around what the amendment actually says. It does not point out a holiday. I personally dubbed it no tax on Christmas. What the sales tax holiday actually targets is the periods between Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So unless you get down at the tree and celebrate Cyber Monday, Mr. Speaker, then we're not pointing out any kind of religious holiday. But one of the funny things I really wanted to talk to you about, just to center back to the amendment, is the point about gimmicks. You know what's funny? The underlying bill, our state budget, Mr. Speaker, raids 20 different accounts, dedicated accounts, including Public Works Assistance Fund, and $880 million out of the rainy day account. You can only spend the same dollar once, Mr. Speaker, and if the argument is that sales tax relief up to $500, which by the way is half of what Governor Ferguson has proposed twice. Half of what Governor Ferguson has proposed twice. So I think the governor would be disappointed to hear how his agreement with myself and this amendment on sales tax holidays is a budget gimmick, when this budget actually has 20 different gimmicks in it, including rating our reserves to one of the lowest in the country, and rating all these dedicated accounts and shifting money and shell games on paper, rating left one, put $569 million into CCA, but first drop it into a higher ed bucket and a couple other capital budget buckets first so that we can refund something again into the general fund. You want to talk about gimmicks, Mr. Speaker. A sales tax holiday is not a gimmick. This budget is one massive shell game and one massive gimmick, and it does nothing to solve affordability in our state. What I do know about this amendment is that people saving 80, 100, maybe a couple $100 possible under this amendment during the most stressful time financially of the year is far less of a gimmick than growing government and raising taxes by $2 billion on the backs of hardworking Washingtonians. People in my district think budgets like this are a gimmick, Mr. Speaker. What they would appreciate is being able to afford anything in the state, because it's one thing is true: this budget does absolutely nothing for the cost of gas, groceries, rent, insurance, healthcare, childcare, you name it. If anything, it makes those things worse. Please vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rising in support of the amendment. You know, when I look at the underlying budget and I see some of the destruction that it does to healthcare, like cuts to assisted living, cuts to dementia care. My grandmother had dementia, and I was there at her side and during the pandemic when she died behind glass, Mr. Speaker. And I couldn't think of something, there's a lot of devastating diseases, obviously, but dementia is one of those that really rips your soul out. When you watch one of your family members suffer from that. And I just feel like this budget attacks low-income Washingtonians, their access to health care. Mr. Speaker, long before H.R. 1, long before this budget, our hospitals have been barely surviving decades without updating Medicaid reimbursement rates. Our providers, our doctors, our nurses, our hospitals have all been struggling from that, including in rural communities and poor communities like mine that I represent that have critical access hospitals. And Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about, the trade-offs here, I just want to be clear that as public employees, me and you, we should pay our fair share to make sure that the social safety net of healthcare and for our low-income communities aren't slowly erased budget after budget after budget, or inaction after inaction after inaction. The good member from the 2nd District talked about how in the last budget, just last year, $782 million were cut from Medicaid. And the double-edged sword of it, Mr. Speaker, is that when you cut a state dollar, you cut an equal matching or maybe sometimes even more federal dollar. As a matter of fact, during the 2008 recession, Governor Gregoire refused to cut Medicaid when they had a tough budget crisis, because then she knew that she would be relinquishing federal dollars. And so that's exactly what happened in the last budget, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what's happening once again. There was a lot of stones being thrown in glass houses over the summer about H.R. 1 and cutting Medicaid and health care from low-income people. Well, all the while, that $782 million cut happened before H.R. 1 was ever signed or even thought of passed into law. Now, Mr. Speaker, in this supplemental budget, $240 or so million additional cuts, which then we will relinquish federal dollars to make a total of over $1 billion cut. But what did we fund instead, as was remarked earlier? We funded more money to illegal immigrant health care through Apple Health expansion. And we gave $3 billion in pay increases to state government. And in order to do that, in order to have what I consider now, under the PEP plan myself, and you might agree with me, Mr. Speaker, is a Cadillac health insurance plan that almost nobody, unless they are a public employee, in my district has the ability to have the same level of care that me and you do. I do think I should pay my fair share. I think you should too. And even after some reduction in the PEB-SEB, as is in this amendment, states, you would still have a more Cadillac health insurance plan than any other private sector plan ever, period. But we're doing that, growing government, and it's growing and it's growing and it's growing on the backs of our people. On the backs of people who put on the work boots, 6 a.m. in the morning, lunch pail and hard hat, go to work for 40 plus hours a week. And yeah, you know what? They can't afford to live in this state. They can't afford their property taxes, their rent, the groceries, the gas with an extra $1 for 60 cents for CCA. They can't afford the policies coming out of Olympia. And you know what? Our neighbors to the east, Idaho, is where people in the Spokane Valley go to get their gas groceries.
Representative Couture, please refine your remarks directly to the policy before the body, which is Amendment 2111. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will attempt to do that. But I think that it's important to know that when we're talking about refunding Medicaid, which is what this amendment means, it means less government, less bureaucracy. It means less Cadillac plans for the few and more support for the many, the low-income people, the seniors, the people who work hard, the blue-collar folks in districts like mine, the robbery that this budget and the budget before it has done to poor communities all across Washington state. It's important to know that this one policy, this amendment, this Medicaid funding, doesn't live in a vacuum with all of the other things that Washingtonians must afford, and they can't afford anything. Mr. Speaker, this amendment is critical to refund our Medicaid and make sure that our hospitals don't shutter and that low-income people have the health care that they deserve instead of funding more and more and more the health care of illegal immigrants who don't belong here. Vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rising in support of the amendment. I think it's critical that whenever there's even a thought or an allegation of fraud, that me and you take that extremely seriously. This is taxpayer money that we're talking about here, and it could be tons and tons and tons of money. It could be tens of hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. You remember, Mr. Speaker, the pandemic where a Nigerian prince scam ripped us off for hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And later, we talked earlier in the session about the Community Reinvestment Program, and I warned you, Mr. Speaker, that if we were going to tackle and put sideboards around a program like that, then it's incumbent upon us to tackle misuse of taxpayer funds everywhere in state government, or else it could be construed that we were only concerned about attacking the accountability of one group of people, and that would be wrong. Mr. Speaker, no one, including the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, can explain some of the concerning things we've seen over the course of this session in some of our home-based daycare systems, seemingly pocketed around one area in our state, in King County. How is it, Mr. Speaker, that a home-based daycare in Washington state can gross over $1 million in a year? I'm a small business owner, Mr. Speaker, with 6 employees, and I don't gross $1 million in a year. Many small businesses don't gross $1 million a year. They have to pay a lot in B&O taxes. But you know what? It's hard for me to believe that a home-based daycare is going to get $1 million in subsidies, and not one, Mr. Speaker, but multiple. And over the course of 5 months' time, as public records show us, some of them making $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 in subsidy payments alone. And even if you added up their fully enrolled status, as the good member from the 7th pointed out, and you understood that even if they were all infants, which would be the highest amount of subsidies possible, around $2,300 a month, that some of these Washington Leering centers are getting tens of thousands of dollars a month more than they could even reasonably receive in subsidies. And when the state auditor's office went to go look and said, oh, we're going to go audit a sample of 40 different daycares in Washington state, and they only had like less than 10 respond, they don't even have to respond to the state auditor's office. And that's why it's important that we investigate fraud in our state. Because, Mr. Speaker, where there's smoke, oftentimes there's fire. And anytime me and you and the legislature decide not to take fraud seriously, not to make sure we're funding, like this amendment does, our fraud accountability, it just makes it look like we're covering it up. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising in support of this good amendment. Like the gentleman from the second said, not a single dime of the $100 million has been used to hire one single police officer in our state. We are 51 out of 50 across all of the nation per capita police, and we are still 51 out of 50 per capita police, and actually dropping in the wrong direction. And I appreciate the words from the good member of the 47th. I think the intention behind House Bill 2015 was mostly noble. We wanted to give $100 million to help start beginning to solve that crisis that we have of lack of law enforcement on our streets. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, House Bill 2015 was built in such a way that it is too extremely administratively burdensome and difficult for any locality to qualify, to even access the money, and that's why no one has accessed it. And the BLEA, the Basic Law Enforcement Academy in Lacey, that this amendment tries to use some of that $100 million to fund is for the exact intent and purposes of House Bill 2015. House Bill 2015 said, let's spend $100 million, get more cops on the streets. And because we have a center that is so far away from some of our counties and some of our cities in the state of Washington, some of these basic training academies help get new recruits because it's closer to home, including here in Thurston County and Lacey. They've already used their own money to build the center. All they want is some assistance from House Bill 2015 and the $100 million that is just laying there, burning a hole in our pocket in the budget, doing absolutely nothing for public safety in our communities right now, to access just 5 million out of the 100 million so that we can have the classes to train more police officers and have more public safety in our communities. That's all this is. And Madam Speaker, if the goal of House Bill 2015 was to get more law enforcement, then the House bill has failed. And so now we need to make some appropriations to try to find ways to do that. The only thing about this amendment that is unfortunate is that more communities across Washington can use centers like this, or more training academies, or more tools, more body cameras, more training for their law enforcement officers so that we have good policing in Washington. But it seems to me, Madam Speaker, that the theory of House Bill 2015 was such that the actual outcome of House Bill 2015 and its design was made sure that we had a pie crust promise of $100 million that will be so locked up as to actually have the intent of never hiring a single police officer in our state. And even if they could access the funds, the $100 million in House Bill 2015, most localities in Washington state couldn't even hire one police officer with it. That's how bad the situation is here in Washington. And I'm proud to back the blue, and I'm proud to support our law enforcement and our first responders in this state. And they need backup. And I feel like that's me and you's responsibility, Madam Speaker, to give them that backup so that when our law enforcement go on dangerous calls where their lives are put on the line, that they have the tools and the training and the backup to be able to respond to those things so that they don't feel the need to put their lives on the line, but they do. They wrote a blank check in service to our state and our country and our community. And they're always, at any given point, willing to cash that check. I don't want to see those checks cashed, Madam Speaker. We need to stand up for our law enforcement, help them out, get more boots on the ground, and start solving crimes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising in support of the amendment, please vote yes. Please vote yes on this amendment to support the nearly 1 million Washingtonians that signed on the dotted line to respect parents' rights in education in the state of Washington. It's time we reaffirm parents' rightful role in the education and upbringing of their children. Madam Speaker, I don't co-parent with the government, and the state does not own our kids. Vote yes.
The good member from the 35th, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising in support of this great amendment to fund our paramount duty of K-12 education, basic education, materials, supplies, and operating costs. Now, we've spoken before, Madam Speaker, how a school district is just like a large volume version of a household. They have to pay for a lot of the same things. And as our constituents are squeezed with affordability issues here in our state, our schools also get squeezed by energy policies, by rising insurance costs, by all sorts of different things. Those schools have to buy the materials, they have to buy the books, the pencils, they have to buy the food, they have to pay the rent. And Madam Speaker, it's becoming more and more impossible to pay those things. Now, Madam Speaker, we heard just a minute ago about the proposed trade-off in this amendment, about reductions in higher ed admin. Not faculty, staff, admin. Now, I could look on a chart, Madam Speaker, and I could provide to you at some point. But what it shows is that we have a negative 11% student enrollment in our higher ed system. But in the same period of time, since the last decade or more, a 52% increase in administrative staff. Many of our colleges have extreme ratios. However, some, like Western Washington and our CJTCs, actually have really great ratios. But some of our larger higher ed institutions have grossly negligent ratios. And Madam Speaker, I think it's important to note that when we're talking about a budget and funding our highest values, it's not like we don't value higher education. We value leveling the playing field so that we can fund our paramount duty first, priorities of government, like which was instituted under Governor Gary Locke. And by leveling a disparity between administrative staff and student enrollment in higher education. And I think that's important because our colleges are not jobs programs in the state of Washington. They're there, they exist to teach adults. But more and more, the underlying budget that this one amendment tries to just tackle one little $300 million MSOC piece of it is robbing from children, robbing from our classrooms. The costs are too expensive, Madam Speaker, and that's why we need this MSOC increase. Now, we have many schools in all of Washington state, including in my own district, that are near or close to binding conditions. Madam Speaker, one of the biggest school districts in my district, the Shelton School District, is in binding conditions, over $2 million in the hole, partially because of the legislature's irresponsibility in funding material supplies and operating costs. And what am I going to say to my constituents if the largest school district in Mason County just disappears? Where will those kids go to school? As you know, Madam Speaker, schools are more than just education. They're community hubs, especially for rural areas. It's important to make sure we're funding MSOC, and we can do that by accepting this amendment and making sure we level set higher education so that it more matches reality, that staffing matches student enrollment. And when we do that, we can help fund our schools and give our kids more opportunities. Please vote yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it's important that me and you don't fearmonger what the amendment actually says. The amendment doesn't cut any of the positions you just heard of. What the amendment does is level sets new ratios and then asks our institutions of higher education to then choose which of those administrative positions are the most important to serve the most dwindling amount of student enrollment ever, negative 11%. And it's amazing, Madam Speaker, if they even, in our K-12 system at this point, make it to the college system, despite the fact that we have some of the most generous college financial aid in the entire country, and simultaneously, one of the worst college-going rates in the country. We are dumping millions upon millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to turn our colleges into jobs programs to serve basically a dwindling every single year amount of student enrollment. Which students, Madam Speaker, are the higher ed institutions serving at negative 11% with a 52% increase in administrators? Meanwhile, we have schools with lead in the water pipes and asbestos in the walls, and sometimes in the good member in the 17th district, where his grandmother went to the school that's been there for 100 years, when it rains on the kids' heads through the ceiling. We're not Flint, Michigan, Madam Speaker. We need to be able to fund our schools and make sure that they have material supplies and operating costs. Our teachers are spending thousands of dollars out of their own pockets to buy books and pencils and supplies. And we didn't give a sales tax holiday on back to school supplies in the last budget so that parents can afford those things either. Madam Speaker, in the state's constitution, there is no paramount duty for higher ed jobs programs for administrators so that they could teach people and help them out with their underwater basket weaving degrees. Vote yes.
Further remarks, the good member from the 35th District, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, tonight I'm a little disappointed, maybe more than a little disappointed. Earlier, I heard about hours ago, and maybe we could have skipped hours and hours of debate on this budget had my side of the aisle been included in this budget process and the 3 million plus people that we represent in Washington State. And what I was jealous of is the bipartisanship of the transportation budget, because both sides work together in the room and get something done on a bipartisan basis. And I think maybe if we work together on that budget, that it wouldn't necessarily be, I don't know how it would turn out, but it wouldn't necessarily be one that I could vote on, but at least it might have been better in my opinion. And I've grown some friendships with the chair of the Appropriations Committee and members of your caucus, and it pains me to be critical sometimes. But what I think, Madam Speaker, is sometimes that what's best to do is to be truthful when you're talking to your friends. And Madam Speaker, we now will have an $80 billion budget, a record for Washington State amount of spending, which will be more spending than we actually project to receive in revenue in tax collections, after a predictable multi-billion-dollar deficit once again after the largest tax increases in state history. And I hear from constituents all across Washington state that they just don't have anything more left to give, especially as we're failing, me and you, Madam Speaker, to deliver results with that record amount of spending that we have in this budget. It is an 11% increase when you add the biennial budget plus this supplemental budget of reckless spending. In caseloads, Madam Speaker, it's said that we educate, medicate, and incarcerate. Those three big caseload buckets remain mostly flat, or even sometimes declining. But we keep spending more to get less. You can't fix budget problems with more spending, Madam Speaker. And you can't fix it with one-time budget gimmicks either. This biennial budget raids 20 different accounts, including an $880 million raid of the rainy day account, public works assistance, and so many other dedicated accounts. You only get to spend the same dollar once. We didn't solve the deficit, me and you, Madam Speaker. We just moved the money around. And I think that we could have done better than that. The best way I could describe this is maxing out a credit card and then using another credit card to pay it off. It's reckless. It's irresponsible. And two of the biggest things this budget does is hinge our entire future on an unconstitutional income tax, which I believe will apply to the rest of us in no time, legally untested, $2.1 billion in revenue we may never see. And it also includes an untested legally raid of a law enforcement officers and firefighters left one pension. $4 billion. No state has ever attempted or achieved such a thing. So we hinge our entire budget, billions and billions of dollars, and if one of those things does not actually occur as planned, then the whole budget is out of whack. Billions of dollars in the hole. And even past the outlook, billions and billions more in price tags, Fair Start for kids, and so many other things. Madam Speaker, the pension system, I have heard from left-wingers and other pensioners that they take this personally. Pension funds should be for pensions. And we offered many different ways, but instead of fixing or helping left two benefits or making whole left-wingers or making whole PERS and TERS one retirees, it just becomes this massive four-step shell game with the left one money that funds $569 million to the Climate Commitment Act and refills some of the rainy day account, which is actually general fund spending in the budget bill. Madam Speaker, we talked a lot about Medicaid today. This budget guts Medicaid. $240 million cut to Medicaid on top of a $783 million cut to Medicaid from the biennial budget to include over $1 billion in cuts to Medicaid. That disproportionately impacts our hospitals, our low-income residents, people who work very hard for a living and still need a little bit of help. It's erasing slowly our social safety net. And we could throw all the stones we want to H.R. 1, Madam Speaker, but H.R. 1 would blush at the Medicaid cuts of this budget. The Medicaid cuts in this budget had nothing to do with H.R. 1. That had everything to do with multi-billion-dollar deficits and not solving the structural problems of the budget to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And we did grow government. We grew government on the backs of our people, not just with tax increases, the largest in state history, but also fee increase after fee increase after fee increase. And then it was said we needed to raise these revenues so those people didn't fall through the cracks, and then we pushed them through the cracks. That's wrong, Madam Speaker. You know, with the income tax, Once you give government the power to tax income, it never gives it back. And many people in my district, and what I hear from tons of people all across our state, is they simply do not trust that regressive taxes will go away as a result of an unconstitutional progressive income tax. They don't trust that it will remain on just millionaires. They know that in the next predictable budget deficit, somewhere in the future, it will be ratcheted down once again. We talk a lot about affordability, Madam Speaker, but after billions and billions of dollars in new spending, the only thing that became more affordable was literally nothing for our constituents. We spent billions of dollars more in their gas, groceries, rent, insurance, healthcare, you name it. I mean, some of the worst in the country for affordability. This budget doesn't solve any of that. And you know, it's funny to me that when families have a financial crisis, they tighten their belt and they cut back just to the essentials. But when government has a budget crisis, it raises your taxes, raises your pensions, taxes your income, spends more money, and then blames the rest of us as we cut essential services from those people, the people that we're here to serve. And that's why I'm disappointed, Madam Speaker. K-12 education, our paramount duty, the bureaucracy grew, government grew, our classrooms didn't. We didn't do anything for our kids. $250 million cut to K-12 education, now going to be 42% of our state budget, a downward spiral for K-12. We couldn't fund material supplies and operating costs. We couldn't have trade-offs for bus depreciation or transition to kindergarten. And then the ultimate insult, the unraveling of McCleary by cutting back LEA funds, literally giving more to the property wealthy districts in a reverse Robin Hood stealing from the poor, property poor districts. I view this budget as an attack on poor Washingtonians. I view this budget as an attack on rural Washington. And it's not surprising why, because rural Washington was not in the room when this budget was developed. Madam Speaker, we could do a whole lot better than this. I believe in one Washington. This isn't it. If we don't fix these problems, we will be back here again, arguing the same thing all over. You can't tax your way out of prosperity, Madam Speaker. Vote no.